My name's Matt Tweedy, and the coolest shit I've ever done is I drank a 29-year-old bottle of spontaneously fermented beer in the dark caverns of a hundreds-old building in Brussels, Belgium.
Welcome back, my creative nerds. Episode 60. I'm your host, Sean McDonnell, and of course, this is another Monday. It's a brand new start to a week, and I am always excited to be chatting with you guys. Of course, if you're not listening on a Monday, it's just because it's not the first Monday. It's the second or third or fourth Monday of the week. You know how we love Mondays here because it's a brand new chance to get out there, try something new, do something cool, and it's a refresh. It's a refresh. You know, if you're not loving a Monday, it's just because you're doing something wrong. That's how I've always felt about it. That's how I feel about it in here. And if you're here, you gotta love a Monday, all right? All right, well, I want to get into this episode because, man, is it ever a good one. I had the chance to sit down with Matt Tweedy from Tooth and Nail Brewery, and wow, so much good knowledge, so much talent, so much just creativity, so just so much, all right? And this is, of course, a video episode because every time I have a guest, I'm always going to have a video, so you can go check it out on youtube.com/@domorecoolshit. You'll find us over there. Of course, you can listen anywhere else that you'll find your podcast. And if you're listening to this, it's probably because you already are. But also, I wanted to let you know before we get rolling here, one thing I did want to let you know is that now Spotify has comment sections. So I would love to be able to continue conversations with folks either on YouTube or on Spotify, being able to have this conversation, this back and forth. I love your emails. I love your messages. I love the Instagram stuff that you guys are sending me. But I'd love to be able to have even more conversations with you folks. So that's a new thing that's happened now on Spotify. So if you're listening out there and you got anything to say, good or bad, let me know. Always happy to have a conversation. But of course, before we dive into this episode, I wanted to just take a little quick look back and a little quick forward to what's coming up. So if you haven't had a chance yet to go back and listen to episode 59, I talked a little bit about why it's so important to play. And I think it is so important to play because we get stuck in life. And I don't know at what age we decide, play is for children and I, as an adult, shouldn't do it. And every goddamn time I tell you, I have to tell you, and you know this already, I'm not telling you anything new. Every time you do play, every time you release, you let go, you know you're not being marked or judged or anything like that. As adults now, when we play, believe me, it's just the adrenaline rush, the endorphins, all the good feelings come rushing in, and your creativity begins to skyrocket, right? If you can just let go of this idea that we are serious adults doing serious business stuff, because we made all this shit up. We made it all up. And it's so, so important. So if you haven't had a chance, go back and listen to that, because if you are stuck in a rut, I firmly believe that it is an opportunity to go try something out of your comfort zone. It is a wonderful thing. It is not a bad thing. If you're stuck in a rut, it's fine. It's not a bad thing. If you're unhappy, even if you don't know that you're unhappy, right? Because I think that was something I talked about a lot, and then we have to rely on other friends and family and stuff to be able to pull us out. Maybe it's even going to be a stranger, and they ask you to do something fun. Do it. Just say yes. Try it. I think it's so important that you go out there and you do that. So go give that a listen. And then, of course, episode 61 coming up in 2 Mondays from now, October 28th. It'll be the last Monday of October. I want to talk a lot about thinking in solutions and not problems. I've been having a lot of conversations recently about that. And I know as someone who owns a business, speaking of Matt Tweedy, he is always thinking of solutions and not problems. And we get into that a little bit. We get into all kinds of different things here. We get talked about. I'm so excited to bring this conversation to you because it is that balance, that drive between how stubbornness and how creativity and confidence all mash together to make this amazing journey that Matt's had. And I couldn't be more excited. We talked a little bit about how his goal kind of happened a little bit later in life. And I'm so excited that you guys are listening to this because I can't for the life of me ever reiterate this enough, that it doesn't matter what age or what stage you're in. If you keep your eyes and your ears and your mind open to opportunities, they will come and they will hit you. And man, when they hit you because man, I had this awesome conversation, and he talks about that opportunity where, like, you know, there was this ground, this part in his life where he just wasn't quite sure, and he was kind of shifting here and there. And when he found it, when he found the thing, whatever that thing is, for him, it happened to be this mash of making craft beer and bringing community together was very, very important to him. It was something that he knew. I love that he talked about he didn't even let his parents know, because he didn't want anybody to say anything, because he knew in his heart that it was going to be the direction forward. And you're going to see that passion. You're going to see that energy that comes out. I love that at some point during this journey, I was listening to other conversations that he's had, and I've read a couple of reviews and interviews that he's had. And in that, and we bring it up again in this episode, that he talks about, there's no question in my mind to be in control of my own fight. At some point, he knew that there was going to be no question in his mind that he was going to be in control of his own fate. And I just love that sentiment. I hope that you can feel that energy. I don't want to talk any more about it. Matt's an amazing human being. I thank him so much for being on here, and I hope that you give this episode a complete and full listen, and you take away all the lessons you can. And I will see you on the other side. Thanks so much. Here's the conversation. All right, great. Well, thank you, Matt Tweedy, for being on the Do More Cool Shit podcast. I appreciate you coming in.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I have a story. I want to start with a story. One of the very first times when you opened, this is how I met you.
Oh, shit.
When you opened, you had barely been open, I think, for like, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 days. It wasn't very long. I wandered in. I was working on a community project, and had been asking all these people if we could, you know, gather stuff. And I think I asked you I went in, I introduced myself. I said, I know you've just opened. Can I ask you for a free case of beer? And you looked at me and you said, yeah, no problem. Yeah, well, let's load. What are you doing? And then I told you what we were doing. And then you're like, oh, great. Here's 2 cases. I was like, what the fuck? Like, people that have been around for a long time hadn't, like, what made you think, like, oh, I should give so much to the community? You've barely been open. You were like brand new.
I'm surprised I didn't say ask Dana.
You were brand spanking new, yeah. Well, and I think I did. I met all of you, and I think I was so shocked by the fact that
those things off.
I was like, what the fuck? Why is this guy nice?
Well, I mean, if I had to be honest, I don't remember that.
No, it was maybe a few years ago.
You know, maybe that came from, I remember, you know, I know Steve Beauchesne, the former owner of Bose, quite well, and I worked there for a year before we opened Tooth and Nail, and I remember him always saying, hey, you know, if you can get some free beer into people's hands, they'll remember you, and you know, I'm pretty sure he built a brand that way, so that's probably where that came from. I had no idea what I was doing those days. Like, it was like, you know, those days are like hair on fire, and you're so punch drunk.
Right.
And maybe even drunk for them.
Right.
And it's just, everything comes at you so fast, and it, you know, it becomes, in my memory, it becomes like that kind of like that dream that you had that stuck with you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, that's fair. That's cool. I just remember, and it did work. Like, I was like, oh, this guy's fucking cool. And I told everybody, I was like, this guy was barely open. Like, I've told that story a million times. So, like, barely open, just said yes to whatever. He was part of the community, you know? And I was like, that's cool. And I think that's one thing that I
only
noticed.
to close the next day.
Yeah. But I did laugh. I was like, oh man, you, like, wow, that's cool. And you and I have obviously had many conversations since then, but it was like that community. Yes, you brew beer. Yes, you have a brew pub. You're obviously passionate about beer. But to me, it was like, oh, it's very clear now over years of knowing you. It's like, oh, community was a thing, like getting people in the same space.
Well, I think I mean, there's two parts to that. First of all, I think that is, you know, the literal definition of a pub.
Yes.
And second of all, my whole life, like I strongly believe that beer is a vehicle to bring people together. So when you combine a pub and beer that's made there, and, you know, we've always looked at Tooth and Nail as a neighborhood brew pub.
Yes.
I mean, the fact that it's gone well beyond the borders of the neighborhood is great, you know, but that's kind of first and foremost the the priority.
Cool. Well, okay. Now I've been listening to your voice is out there. I've heard many things. I've read many things. I was curious. You went from Wildcat Dry
Don't bring this up.
opening your first brewery. Well, but everybody does that, right? Yeah. It's like, you got to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And I won't even repeat how old you were when you first started, because I was the same age probably.
Yeah.
But what I just think that's so interesting. Like, do you remember that journey of like starting somewhere to like where you are now?
Yeah, I mean, I remember the journey quite well. There's spaces in there that are a little blurry, but yeah, I don't know. It's funny because you hear a lot of people talk about their careers or their passions or their hobbies or all these things. And growing up is always kind of like, well, you eventually figure out, what you were supposed to do on this earth or however you want to look at it.
Sure.
And I mean, people like, how'd you get into this? And I was kind of like, well, it kind of got into me, like in both physically and
right.
and mentally and emotionally. And so, it took me a lot of years of combing through different things I like to do, different things, that made me happy, to realize that this was kind of sitting there the whole time. I enjoyed the taste of beer at a very young age. I enjoyed hanging out with my buddies and sitting around a round table in high school, drinking bottles of really shitty beer. But there's something about that taste. And if I think about the beers that I currently make, I wouldn't have enjoyed those. It's just too big a flavor most of the time.
Right.
We were 15 or 16 in high school when we first saw the Unibrew poster for Maudit. In the window
very
of the depanneur that we used to go with fake IDs and buy our beer from. And we looked at it, we're like, oh my God, this thing's 8% alcohol. We got to try it, right?
Yeah, crazy.
And man, we each had a bottle of that beer. And I remember us being like, who homebrewed this thing? Like, this is just the most vile, decrepit. And we enjoyed the buzz, but outside of that, it was terrible.
Isn't that everybody's first experience with like any kind of alcohol? Like, I
mean, it wasn't for me.
I feel like nobody ever.
I had a Labatt Blue.
Okay.
I don't know how old I was. Maybe just before the age of 10 or just after. Had sips of my dad's Blue because that's what he drank, and I loved it. Like, there was never a point at which the taste of beer was off-putting to me.
Oh,
and so then from there, I just loved beer. And then, there were ideas I had in my early 20s of like, oh, maybe I should try home brewing. I bought books on home brewing, never did anything about it.
Right.
Never bought any equipment, but I read about it. I worked at a brew pub in university and they made their own beer. And that's when I started liking, small batch beer or whatever you want to call it. And it kind of went from there. But it's always been there. It was just a matter of being patient enough to find it.
And paying attention to, because I that was one thing that really impressed me too when I hear your story and listen to it. I feel like so many people put so much pressure on themselves, for talking about doing your cool shit and being creative. And, it's like, oh, well, I have to figure it out now. It's like, but you didn't discover it until you were in your early 30s, right?
But it took a lot. I had to be pretty stubborn. And I had conversations with very close friends where I was like, am I really going to be a teacher? Or am I really going to, pursue being an urban planner? And the only reason I was thinking about that is because I was actually getting good marks in an adult university class I was taking. I was like, maybe I should do this.
Yeah.
But I remember specifically telling one friend, I don't know, I feel like there's a cool career out there that is waiting for me.
Yeah.
And I remember saying those words. I had no idea it was going to be this at that time.
Right.
I don't know what it was that, I was probably 33, 34 when I kind of dawned on me to do this. Maybe, anyways, in my early 30s, I don't remember exactly. But the second that it hit me, it was like this moment where everything in my life just made sense.
You were just like, oh shit, yeah.
And there was so much clarity. And I remember specifically saying, I'm not going to tell my parents about what I'm choosing to do because I will not accept somebody telling me that this is a bad idea.
Right.
And that may be the most stubborn I've ever been in my life. And it wasn't until I think I had actually been accepted into brewing school when I finally said to my parents, so this is what I'm going to do.
Right. So. Yeah. That was also in my little notebook. I was like, oh, I remember hearing you tell that story, and it was like, oh, that's really cool. And also, had you ever been stubborn? Well, you just said, it was the most stubborn you've ever been, but like, obviously it served you well. You're a few years in now.
I mean, it still does.
It's coming along.
It's not the easiest path, but it still does serve me well.
But it's so interesting though, to like, when you find that thing, that's how I think, like, when people's like, oh, how do you know what you want to do for the rest of your life? And, we get a lot of creatives on here and they're not quite sure, like, should I do this? Should I do that? And it's like, I don't know. I think there is like inherently something that will be like this, and then no one can tell me otherwise. I've told the story on this podcast where like, many, many years I was like, I might be homeless, but I need to make this work because I don't want to do anything else.
Yeah, and I mean, I can't speak for everyone's experience, but in my experience, when that, I don't know what epiphany hit you or whatever you want to call it, when that day came where you were like, oh my God, this is it. This is what I'm going to do. There's a degree of total confidence that comes with that. Right. And it's confidence that I didn't have in a lot of other things in my life. And so I remember even when we were opening Tooth and Nail, obviously this type of business is pretty cash intensive to get open. And I remember a lot of people I know who run successful businesses or have had a lot of success through their life were like, man, this is a huge risk. Do you know what you're doing?
Right.
And I remember looking at them every time going, I don't see the risk.
Right.
I'm not sure I understand the risk because to me in my mind, this is it.
This is all I can do now.
This is all I can do. And I'm so hell bent on knowing what I'm doing that there can't be a risk. Right. In hindsight, that was really dumb, but
it got you a place. Like I think that's interesting because I think so many people. Where do you think you developed that skill? That like the stubbornness to not see the risk, because that
it's inherited.
I battle all the time with people saying like, oh, I don't know if I could make it as an artist or a creative. I'm not sure. And I'm like, and I look at their work and I'm like, you could if you wanted to, but they have so much self-doubt.
Well, I mean, at that time, and this is a bit of a line in the sand. This is when I put that foot forward to opening the business. This isn't when I put my foot forward to becoming a brewer.
Right.
But I had been, I guess the word would be, I wouldn't say stubborn enough, but maybe disciplined enough that I knew I wanted to get a lot of background knowledge in the brewing profession before opening the business. And that wasn't really the trend at the time. Craft breweries were being opened by home brewers that were like, I made some great beer. My friends think I should go pro.
Right. For
me, I really wanted to have a better understanding of a lot of it. And then when we opened, I still didn't understand, 75% of what I was doing. Right now, I'm into mechanical stuff. Like I was not a handyman at all. Right. Well, now I have massive pieces of machinery that need, a lot of care and attention. Building like sloping floors for drainage, like just all these things, all these things that you don't think about. I'm
just want to make beer.
Hey man, if I use this malt and these hops, this is going to be fantastic. And this is my prerogative to put this together in any way, shape or form I want. And I can let my imagination run wild. Well, there's a whole other side to it that it was a pretty serious crash course, but I was pretty confident in my abilities to learn. I've always been a fast learner when I decide I want to be.
Right. Yeah. That's fascinating to me, of like that, like the understanding that there's other things. Like you just wanted to make beer. You wanted to drink beer, and then you're like, hey, maybe I should make it. And then you're like, okay, but what about all the other 19 other things that I got to learn, or 100 other things I got to learn?
Well, I think there was the idea that I wanted to make beer, but I also knew I wanted to make the best beer in my understanding and ability that I had. Like the absolute best thing that I knew how to make at all times. And then it quickly dawned on me that I really had to have a deep understanding of all of the parts that aren't making beer. right?
Yeah.
Right, because the breweries, it's a, I mean,
a
it's
running,
a
living
food
thing,
production
yeah.
facility that needs to not break down
Right.
and operate, and so that was all a good kick in the ass. Yeah.
Which is probably good. I don't know. At some point, do you feel like you like some of those? I don't know, failures, but like not failures, but like lessons, learning. Like I feel like those help you make a better business, a better person, a better
100%.
everything,
Yeah,
right?
no doubt. No
Yeah,
doubt.
yeah. Where did you learn? And I know a little bit about your background, but like, where do you think you learned to deal with like, okay, well, I don't know this. I guess I'll learn about it. Like, where did that come from?
I mean, that's pretty forced on you when you take the leap and decide you're going to open a business.
Yeah.
I probably had I been a head brewer or a brewmaster for another company, despite whether I was, successful or not, I probably wouldn't have been forced into those endeavors as quickly. So there's that part of it. I specifically remember getting, my first canning, well, the only canning machine we've had. And like this thing arrived on my doorstep and I had no idea how to operate it. And because I've worked on bottling lines, but they're all different,
Sure.
right? I know the mechanisms of what has to happen to get beer into a vessel with a degree of quality. But outside of that, I knew nothing about it. And, I had somebody from the company get it started up and, he was there for a day and then it's like, good luck.
Right. Then you're on your own.
Yeah. And so, after a couple of months, like these machines, they've got tons of moving parts, like inevitably they start to break down in one way or another. And the first breakdown we had, I remember sitting there going, well, I have no idea what to do. This thing's from Alberta. It's 7 a.m. here. It's 5 a.m. there. There's no one to talk to there. I got to get this beer into the cans. I got to get another beer into the tank. And so I was like, okay, well, I just got to open up the box. So I opened up the electrical panel. There's a billion wires and you just start trying to figure it out.
Sure.
And so
plugging things, unplugging things.
that's it. And so when
Yeah.
you're kind of under that amount of pressure, you're forced to figure it out. You have to figure it out. And I can tell you about so many pieces of machinery, or even just when it comes down to the beer itself, trial and error, just different techniques and things. You get forced into these measures that if I wasn't the head of the operation, I'd probably wait for the head of the operation to come by and figure it out.
Right. Yeah.
Right.
You would just rely on.
I don't know if that's my personality. I might try to dive in there, but
Right.
it's always easy. These are expensive pieces of machinery, so if my guys are like, "You do it, not me," I get it.
Right.
I'm not.
Right.
I'm the guy who can take the fall for an $80,000 piece of machinery getting broken for a week.
Sure.
So.
But yeah, that's an interesting take though. Of like, I don't know. I love the fact that you said like, you just couldn't even see the risk. I feel like, and it's like I feel like that's the same with all of those machinery. You just have no other option.
Yeah.
Like that's just you have to.
There's like I said, there's a line in the sand, and once you take your foot and you cross that line in the sand, you're in, and you have the option to not do anything about the problems, but the repercussions of that are not fun.
Right. And I feel like I don't know. I feel like so many creatives and so many people that listen to this podcast are waiting to take that first step, or maybe they're thinking that they need to learn more. I often hear that of like, I think I've told this story before, but I knew a lady had taken 250,000 photographs on her own and developed them in a black room. But when her and I were working together and she was looking to find out what her next career was, it was not photography, or she didn't think it was. And then we started chatting and I was like, well, why don't you, I was like, are you fucking kidding me? You've developed 250,000 photographs over the years. And she's like, well, I never went to school. I didn't learn. I'm like, what are you talking about? I was like, you've learned. I saw your 10th photo and I've seen your 210th photo.
I mean, I think if I had to comment on that situation, it's like one thing that I learned very, very quickly, because brewing your first batch of beer, and I was once again stubborn, and I decided I didn't want to go the easy route and get these extracts and everything. I had to go whole hog and do an all grain brew with real ingredients, and that was probably a dumb move. But anyways, the point being that once you get started on whatever your creative endeavor is, the learning curve is so astronomical. I mean, so I can only put it into my own context, but every batch of beer I brewed, whether it was great or whether it was terrible, I learned at least 50 things per batch.
Right.
And so you get to a point where you've learned so much and you're still not great at it, but you know, say I brew a batch of beer and I learn 50 things. How did I learn those 50 things? Well, I learned them from the process. I learned them from tasting it. I learned them because I tasted it. Then I went back into the books and I studied all these things and I cross-referenced all these things because I wanted the next one to be successful.
Right.
And so it doesn't matter if you're in a scientific endeavor or a creative endeavor, and I kind of straddle the line of both. You really, you know, if you want it to be great, it will be great.
Right.
You know, so don't spend years and years and years being too afraid. You know, get a couple of tries under your belt and then go for it.
Right.
You're never leaping out of the gate with a world-class anything.
Right. Exactly.
Right? Never.
Music to my ears. Fuck. Every musician, artist, it's like, oh, it's not perfect. It's gonna never. I
think about songwriting all the time.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I'm not a musician. I used to play guitar. I was okay at it. But, you know, more chords and chord progressions.
But I know music's been a huge part of your life.
Sure, I love it. And I think about songwriters, right? And you get to these some people and they write these incredible songs, and it's like, well, it wasn't always like that, right? Like I'm sure you write your first song and you're like, ooh, this has a cool little hook here and I don't really like this much, and maybe you try and improve on that or whatever. But then that second song you write, you're going to take everything you learned from that first song, and you know, if you want to be good at it, if you don't care to be good at something, then you're great.
Right.
Then you don't have to worry about anything and there's no stress.
Right.
But songwriting, totally. Like,
when you brewed your first batch, did you brew like a huge batch, or did you brew small batches?
No, I did a small batch. I did like a 20-liter batch. That, you know, in the end, I ended up with 12 bottles of beer. That's not 20 liters, right? So like the losses and the understandings and the lessons involved in that were massive. That beer was pretty good.
Sure.
It was drinkable, had a hop character. We liked it. Second and third brew were terrible.
Sure. You overcorrected too much, maybe? Or
for sure.
Like you were like, oh God, this didn't quite work. No. Let's do a bunch.
Here's 50 lessons from the first batch. Let's change all of those.
Let's change everything.
Things. Yeah, that's exactly.
Oh God, yeah.
That's and crazy. Actually, as a brewer, professionally, I've had to learn to suppress those urges and just work on one kind of little thing at a time.
Love that.
Yeah.
Love that, because
that's tough. That's the hardest part.
That's a huge thing for anybody that's creative, scientific, whatever it is. It's like, oh, I'm going to make this change and that change. It's like, maybe just make one change. Also, don't brew a whole fucking...
Sure.
Like, don't brew 100 cans or whatever. You know, I like that method. Because I think people are so scared. And I'm like, you don't have to sink yourself. Like, you don't have to, like...
No, and
start
it is
rocket. Make three mugs. Make 3 mugs. If you're
it
a
is
potter.
The hardest thing to learn though, because when you're going through that, when you're looking at your painting, when you're drinking the glass of beer you made, when you're analyzing the song you wrote, when like whatever your medium is, right? You look at that and go, okay, like here's 10 things I can do to make it better. And then your brain goes to this place where you can taste that, or you can see it, or you can hear it. And you're like, yes, like that's just going to propel me so much further along. Right. And then you try it and you totally royally screw it up because you've gone too far now.
Right.
And you've made a bit of a muddy mess.
Mm.
So
when do you know, or when did you know, or have you even got there yet? Like, oh, this is a really good, I've made something really fucking great. Like, how many years into it did it take you to be like, or are you there yet even?
I've done it a couple of times. Those are pretty special. It's interesting because what I've learned through the years is that the times that I've achieved something that I think is really fantastic on the first go, I always put 4 to 6 weeks of studying and thinking about and mapping it out and considering the conclusions well before I ever put grain into water.
Right.
So whether, like one of the first ones was Valor, our Belgian Saison. That first batch was exactly what I wanted to make. But I mentally worked on that beer for 6 weeks before we ever even tried it. And then it's a roll of the dice.
How many years had you been working on creating beer up until even that point?
On beer itself?
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. I
decades?
mean, that was in the first year of Tooth and Nail being open.
Sure.
So no, it wasn't decades. Probably 3 years as a professional brewer. But
you had been
there's still
right?
a little bit of luck involved in everything too,
sure.
right? Like, and it depends if you can see the luck or whether you can see, all the what's the opposite of luck, hardships or whatever you want to call it, right? And at that time, I was feeling really, really good about the direction of the brews we were doing. When I opened Tooth and Nail, I had an idea of what I wanted to start brewing with, and they were pretty simple, classic kind of flavors, because I needed to figure out how the equipment wanted to work, because every piece of equipment you have is going to do things a little bit differently for you, and you're the master of trying to make it work the way you want, and then you bring yeast into the equation and everything goes to hell in a handbasket. Right. But I was feeling really good about what we were doing at that time, and it started to kind of shape what we were going to do. When we opened Tooth and Nail, there was no, this is going to be the beer that is going to be the flagship, or we're going to sell it. It was like, well, let's see how this goes. Let's see what people gravitate towards, and et cetera, et cetera. But with Valor, that one was pretty special. And then one of the only other ones was our porter, Steadfast, like a London porter that, probably in hindsight, the worst selling beer we've ever made. But definitely one of the best beers we've ever made. It's just not a flavor that's in fashion. But that one I spent a lot of time, and that one, that recipe was being developed for years in my head. It started out with one thing where it was actually going to be a blend of 3 different brewed beers, like 3 different finished beers, because that's the historical context of how porter came to be.
Okay.
And then I tried to, relax on the labor of all that, and how specific it had to be. And then it was, trying to take that brew and engineer it so it came across as being that way, et cetera, et cetera. But one of the first names I came up with for Tooth and Nail back in like 2007 or 2008 or years was 3 Threads, and it was based on porter, because that's how porter became developed. It was from 3 different threads, 3 different blends. And so it started way back then. Yeah. So some of these things percolate for a really long time.
Yeah.
Exile, a new beer that we have now, that percolated for months and months and months, but I couldn't quite figure out what it was that my brain was telling me I wanted to do.
That's so fascinating. How many beers have you brewed to date, do you think? Like different kinds?
It depends. Just unique recipes.
Yeah.
Not that many, probably between 60 and 75 or something, I would say.
That seems like a lot to somebody that doesn't brew beer. That seems like a lot to me.
Right.
That's a lot of different recipes,
Yeah, not all of those were brewed commercially for
Right.
Tooth and Nail. Some were home brewed, some were done on our pilot system. I that's my guess. I mean, I could go through some records, but I would guess in the neighborhood of 75.
Seems like a lot. It seems that seems like a lot to me.
Sounds like about 70 too many.
70 too many. But do you consider yourself creative, right? Would you say you do? Yeah.
I do. Yeah. I consider myself I consider myself to be a creative person that has spent many years with that creativity being stunted for a billion different reasons, and this became my outlet.
I like in one other, I think it was a podcast I was listening to, you said there was at some point there was no question in my mind that I wanted to be in control of my own fate, and that was like this. That really sparked something in me, because I'm like, yeah, that's all I ever wanted to do. Like, what I'm doing now is interesting, and I just wanted to be able to control what I did, and I feel like you're doing that in the brewery, and now even more so with, like, I don't know, I think it takes a lot of guts to try it. Why wouldn't you just brew 10 beers and just, have those be the ones? Just, people like them, just keep brewing those. Like, what drives you to make the 70 too many?
Well, I mean, first of all, the experimentation with different ingredients is paramount to making a good beer. Even if you want to go back to a beer that has like one malt, one hop, you need to really understand how things want to interact, because you can put these recipes together and now you've got this really interesting concoction, of cereal grains and plant matter being the hops, maybe some fruits, maybe some spices and all this in one big vat, and then you hand it over to one of 100 different yeast strains that can have its way with it, and then you have to wrangle that in to make sure it does what you want it to. And so that process, I'm fascinated and very passionate about process. And so those processes, the experimentation with that is really what drives you to try all these different things. And, being creative on a small scale is very different from now I'm in production. So I've got these beers that people in the brew pub like. I have these beers that people in the marketplace like. And those are the ones out of all of them that I really like too. So let's put a focus on that so that everybody's happy. I've had lots of beers that consumers like that I don't.
Yeah.
And I don't make them anymore, because that kind of feels like, your Guns N' Roses on stage playing Sweet Child of Mine again, because you're like, I don't really love this song, but we're just gonna make everybody happy, and that's not really in my DNA. I do like making people happy, but if I can take the beers that they like and I like, and then build the business around that, those are the ones that go to production, and then your creativity becomes the fine tuning of all those and dealing with annual fluctuations in your ingredients, because we're brewing with natural things that grow differently every year. And so the adjustments there, and then taking it up here and there, and then all of a sudden, oh man, I just came up with this process that could extract this flavor we've been talking about for so long, and then that'll make that beer better. That's where the creativity comes in on the production side of things, but then you also need that kind of mad scientist outlet on the other side.
Just to try some stuff.
Yeah, like we're doing our anniversary this year. We're doing 8 of them are brand new brews out of 9. Wow. And 6 of those were done on the pilot system. And
started small.
Every single one of them is great. Like I'm not like we're really like. Sometimes it's a roll of the dice. You put in all your eggs in one basket. Okay, we're going to do this big party around these beers, and this one's pretty good, so it's fine to, no one's going to notice all the bad things that we notice and all this, but these ones are generally great. So we're actually just getting better at our craft at that stuff as well.
That's cool. Yeah. I definitely had that. I'm glad you answered that. You answered that because I was like, oh, how do you balance? Because I think that happens for a lot of artists, musicians, stuff too. Of like, how do you balance what you want to do and what the fans want? So I'm glad.
The easiest answer is you don't balance anything, but
just do what you want.
Still,
but you need to sell shit.
Yeah, I gotta put food on the table.
Yeah, it's great that you like that beer, but if nobody's gonna buy it,
there's been a couple of those for sure.
Yeah. Well, you said Steadfast.
Steadfast being the
you
case
loved
in
it,
point.
and people were like, eh.
Yeah. There's a few of them.
Does that hurt your soul?
Yeah. It does, for not because people don't buy them. I think it hurts my soul because of where my industry has gone in the past little while, and we'll see what happens with that going forward. But the industry became almost like back to the 1970s, like industrial lager phase, but instead of, some bland industrial lagers, it was all just kind of hazy IPAs and fruited sours. And so those things sell like crazy. And dark beer has always had kind of a bad connotation because people will try a Guinness and go, I don't like that. Well, I mean, there's a billion other flavors than just Guinness and a dark beer. So
and that's
some
all
of those
we know.
Things,
that's all we know because that's what we've seen.
For sure. And we really try to produce a wide variety of flavors, especially on the pub side of things, because not everybody does like the popular beers, and we want to have a little something there for everybody. And if we have a wide canvas of colors and glassware and flavors, then I actually am offering an experience in that way. So those beers are really important to me. Because I'm enamored with it and somebody else isn't, that doesn't bother me. It's more, why won't they give it a shot, or why is it immediately off-putting to them?
I want to talk a little bit about the pilot, because we've talked about the pilot system a little bit, but you didn't always have the pilot system.
No.
That was newer in the last couple of years, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was a pre-COVID purchase, and then
Right.
we got it up and running a month before COVID hit. So then it just sat there for 3 or 4 years.
And was that a new set of tools for you to like be able to play with stuff?
Yeah, I mean, the original idea was so the business was doing well, but we were noticing a bit of a lull on Monday and Tuesday nights. Specifically Tuesdays, I think I remember. And we were like, well, how are we going to get people out on Tuesdays to fill the pub? And then, the idea came up is if I invest in this pilot system, we could do at the time, especially, well, always IPA is very popular, but at the time IPA was out of control popular.
Right.
And we were like, well, we could just pump out a brand new IPA every Tuesday night, and it goes on draft, and it goes in crowlers to take home, and we can blow through that in a night, and people will come out to try, because IPA is almost like a beer style. It's almost a drink on its own now. A hazy IPA, West Coast IPA, East Coast IPA, Belgian IPA, black IPA, brown IPA, red IPA, white IPA. You can go on. The list goes on forever. And so we could just experiment with all this. And through that, we were just going to become better brewers in understanding different hop interactions and the way those different hops play with each other. Because if you have Cascade that tastes like grapefruit and pine, and you've got Citra that might taste like passion fruit and some other citrus flavors, it doesn't necessarily mean that if you put them together you're going to get all those flavors. They might actually combine and create something very new.
Right.
And so it's going to allow us a lot of experimentation from that point. So that was really exciting. And then we probably fired it back up just as kind of coming out of COVID. I think one of the first times we fired it up was for a staff party. And I said, well, what if at the staff party we can brew a batch of beer together as a staff?
Right.
The front of house staff gets to understand the brewing process a little bit more, and those who really want to get involved can dive deep and stand by the pots the whole time, and others can go fuck off and have a drink. But we decided to make a Corona style Mexican cerveza to serve at the beach party we were going to have in a month.
Yeah.
Right. So then we were like, okay, well that worked out pretty well. And so then it became this thing where, because we don't have a lot of time to use it right now. And we were like, okay, well, this is great for events. So then St. Patrick's Day, we did a dry Irish stout and an Irish red. And then last year for our anniversary, we did an Oktoberfest theme. So we did a bunch of German beer styles, like a Kolsch and alt beer and some Weiss beers and things like that. And so this year we have some goals. So first of all, I would like to bring back the IPA night, so to speak, but not really focus on IPAs, but focus on, here now we make these 6 beers all the time.
Right.
And they'll always be at the brew pub, provided we can keep up with them.
Right.
But now we have a special. Like a food special for a week coming from a kitchen. Now we have a beer special. And we can bring back a lot of those fan favorite beers, Sucker Punch and Tenacity, Birds of Prey and stuff for a week's time, and experiment and develop new things and just flex our muscles and continue to learn, really.
And flex your muscles and probably not lose your shirt ever on it. Like if you have to dump one of those, it's not great, but
nobody likes doing it, but sure.
It's not like,
it's not like dumping one of the other tanks.
Yeah, right.
That hurts.
How big is the biggest tank you guys have?
About 3,800 liters. Which in the grand scheme of a brewery is still a small tank, but for us it's quite large.
You ever have to dump one of those?
I have.
How does that feel? How do you deal with that?
We had a little sip of bourbon and dumped some in the drain along with the beer.
Yeah.
That was because there was a tornado like in September 2018, 2019. I can't remember the one that came through, and we lost power just as Vim and Vigor was starting its fermentation, and that beer has to remain at about 10 degrees for 5 or 6 days, and it shot up to like 28 degrees. And I walked in, tasted the beer. I was like, not gonna work.
Can't serve that. Yeah, that's crazy. Yeah, so what a great tool to have then. If you have this other tool that you're like, I can try stuff. It works, maybe it doesn't work. I don't know, but I always encourage people to think about that stuff too, as they're developing their practices. Right? It's like
we have a lot of confidence in our abilities to make a good beer, and there's some fundamental things that you can't lose track of in order to do that. And if you follow those steps,
Yes.
Whether the
Right,
beer is
right.
exactly what you want it to be or not, it can still be a very good quality beer with good balance and good flavors
Right.
that you can then put out to the public. There is one commercial batch that we made that I dumped because I thought that that was not of the quality that we were expected to produce.
Right.
And that one didn't hurt.
No, because you knew
that
you were
was
doing...
that was me being like, well, maybe it was a bit arrogant to just try out these 3 experiments on a
Right.
1,500 liter batch. You
Right.
know, that was kind of dumb.
Right.
So-
And you're like, I'll take my lumps on that one.
Yeah.
I did that.
But the ones that you lose because of a mechanical breakdown
right.
or
Yeah.
things like that, those hurt for sure.
That's shitty.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's nothing you did then, right? It's
Yeah.
not, you couldn't control that.
No.
Yeah. Fair enough. Before Tooth and Nail, I think I understand the story of you going and brewing with some pretty cool brewers around the world.
Yeah.
How did you get the confidence to go and ask those people to let you, like, why? Is it just because you were stubborn and you were just like, whatever? What are you gonna do? Say no? And like, what were those experiences? For those who don't know, like, you had some pretty awesome experiences.
Yeah. Well, I traveled to Colorado to work at a brewery, Avery Brewing Company, for, I don't know, 7 or 10 days. And then I went to Belgium to work at Cantillon, which is a very ancient and unique and wonderful place.
How old were you this time? In your 20s?
So I would have been 34.
Okay. Oh, you're in your 30s.
Maybe, yeah. So
Okay.
2000, I think I went to Avery in 2008 and the other places in 2009.
Yeah.
If I remember correctly. But
Okay.
So at the time, you know, I had been in restaurant work a lot, and I really admired and followed what the chefs were doing, because I had always considered maybe getting into the culinary arts, because cooking is like, I love cooking.
Yeah.
A huge hobby of mine. And I decided at one point, you know, after serving and bartending in restaurants, that the lifestyle was probably one that was going to be short-lived, and I didn't want it to take away my love of that hobby.
Right.
So I kind of said, well, I'm not sure that that's really the direction I want to go, but I'm, you know, always friends with the people in the kitchen, always friends with the cooks. And I saw some of these excellent chefs, you know, go off and do a stage at a restaurant here or there for a week, and like, what are you doing that for? And they're like, well, I get to learn other ways to do things. I get to learn under the umbrella of this great chef that I've admired and stuff. And I was like, well, why couldn't I do that in brewing?
Yeah.
And a chef I was working for at the time was very encouraging of that model. And so, I mean, there are lots of funny stories that probably involved a lot of alcohol that led me to have the confidence to ask these people if I could come hang out.
Because you were
at their
new,
brewery.
like you weren't the Matt Tweedy that we know now, like.
No, I was a fly. On
So
the
why
wall.
would anybody give you the time of fucking day?
Well, I had a good time with them.
You know, that's so funny.
I, in certain circumstances, probably conveyed that I loved having a good time and that I loved beer, and that I was very, very adamant that I wanted to understand if this was a career that was going to make sense for me. And there were some late night fun things that happened. And at the end of it, I still remember the first one I did in Colorado. All of the brewers there were super pissed off that the owner had said yes to me going and doing
New
this
dude doesn't know
stage
really
there.
much.
They'd never done it.
Right.
And as somebody hanging out a brewery, you're really just in the way.
Yeah, right.
And it's a busy work, and it's labor intensive work, and they were all really pissed off that the owner
Who's this
had
new
said
guy
yes.
from Canada, nonetheless.
Anyways, it turns out the owner didn't actually remember that he had said yes.
You just showed up.
It was a follow-up email I had sent to him going, so, you know, we discussed these dates. Are we still on? And he was like, oh, yeah, for sure.
Obviously.
And then had to go with his tail
so
between his
funny.
legs and talk to his head brewer going, so...
We got this dude. He's going to come up. That's
and
great.
then I followed through on it. And I asked a guy in England at a beer dinner was there. Because at that point I developed a confidence and just said, hey, what if I came by and did this?
And what's the worst they're going to say if...
Well, some people said no.
Yeah, right. And that's fine.
Yeah.
Like that
It was fun.
Really
I was upset because I wanted to go to those places. Then I think it was Dogfish Head in Maryland or in Delaware that we actually started working on trying to get me there, and then that was a green card and border issue. Right. And I'm pretty conservative. I don't like breaking rules because I always get caught in my entire life. Every time I break a rule, I get caught. So I've kind of learned from that, and I'm just not the person that gets away with these things. Yeah. So I wasn't going to cross the border and try that out.
Sure.
And
So you did that. So even that is ballsy and fun to me in my head of like, I don't know. Yeah, if you have somebody in your life or you have something that you want to do, why just send an email, right? We have so much easy access now.
Yeah. Yeah, you just have to find the determination, right?
And what's the worst that
people the hardest thing in my life that I've ever done was putting one foot in front of the other. So I spent, and I think it was actually that foot where I knew I was going to open tooth and nail, because I had a ton of friends that knew that I wanted to do this. They thought I'd probably be pretty good at it. They knew that this was the goal. And they'd always be like, so how's the business plan coming? I haven't started it. Do you know what you're going to do? I have no idea, And it was that real daunting thing. And then I had one buddy was just like, well, why don't you just call an equipment supplier and ask how much it costs to buy this? And that was it. It was like a January day, and I was living in Toronto at Dana's place, and just like, hey, I'm looking for a quote on, a 10 hectoliter brew house. How much does it cost?
Sure.
And then I got an answer back, and that was it. But it took that, putting that foot in front of the other. And once you take that step, and you're passionate about it, you will be determined.
Right. It's just one step. That's all it takes.
That first step is the hardest one.
Yeah, sure, yeah. Well, it's the same like working out, anything that you want to do, you're like, oh, I guess I'll go to the gym. And it's like, okay, but if you
and the more that you can get comfortable with how uncomfortable it is, the easier it gets, and the more great things start happening, right? Yeah. Like right now, I kind of consider myself to be in a little bit of a change. Like I'm going through some changes, a metamorphosis of looking at my brewing career and understanding, hey, I've had some good fortune, and I put in a lot of really hard work, and I've been pretty successful with the goals that I had on a brewing scale.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean I'm done learning. That doesn't mean I'm done brewing.
Right.
But now I'm like, hey, this brewing gig comes to a real quick stop if I don't learn how to run a business pretty well. And then that became very daunting in that, yes, I was running a business, but was I really running the business? Was I really trying to figure out how to be, because running a business is actually insanely creative.
Right.
You are making something out of nothing that doesn't exist.
Did you hear that?
Right. And so now I'm really, really motivated on that side of things. And the more I get motivated and the more I put that one foot in front of another, the more creative ideas that come to me, and the more I can kind of evolve that side of things. And I'm finding myself in my life right now to be very excited about that. Yeah. And I've got an amazing brewing team that are really, really excited about, maybe taking on some of those other things that I took on, or becoming such a huge part of that quality process, and just all that stuff. So it's really fun from that perspective.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
So brewery's open, everything's going, pretty well. Then at some point, you always had to have some food, but now you've decided, okay, well now let's really have food. Why was that again like an uncomfortable step where you were like, oh, I need to because you always had some food?
Yeah, it was uncomfortable. It wasn't, there's a lot of timing that went in there with unfortunate events in my life. There was, the whole COVID-19 pandemic was the biggest shit show on earth. Yeah. And everybody felt that individually and collectively. And coming out of that, the landscape of what we were fortunate enough to attain in the first few years of business had completely changed. And so, COVID hits and everybody goes on a massive drinking binge, and it's like, hey, let's just get drunk all the time and show up on Zoom. I have to work from home for now. And, our sales were through the roof, and this was like beer to go sales were through the roof. So that was like, that was a tough adjustment, and we were really happy about it. And then everybody realized what they were doing to themselves. And we're like, wait a second, I still have a life to live. Let's get a little healthier.
Yeah.
And perhaps because of the pandemic, perhaps because of other factors, younger people not getting into drinking beer quite as much. It's one of, seen as one of the more unhealthy alcohols, and just a whole storm of factors coming in. And then coming out of the pandemic, us realizing that people weren't lining up with groups of 10 to try 8 different tasters of 8 brand new beers and things like that. So we had to provide another reason for people to come.
Yeah.
And through that, really understanding that, the beer is the vehicle or the product that's being served in what is actually another business, and that's the hospitality business. And hospitality and service are 2 different things. So for us to be hospitable and really want to welcome people into a space that I particularly think is very warm and inviting and I love, we had to offer more. And so the choice of food was tough, because there's a lot of moving parts with that are hugely challenging, and it's difficult to make money off of, especially today. And high prices and just all of these things, but to get people in for that, and then try a beer or 2, or we offer more non-alcoholic things, more wine, and that will continue to evolve.
Right.
We're still really restricted in the food that we can make, because the investment of putting a large-scale commercial kitchen in isn't something I want to entertain in this facility.
Right.
And so, we were able to get a pretty cool little pizza oven, and we work with Pizza Romana to get us these amazing pizza crusts.
Yeah. Well, you've tried a bunch of different things too,
yeah,
right?
we've tried lots.
And
of
that's what I
things.
liked. I was like, you always like, you elevated, like it started very simple, and then, as time, I would imagine it's the same as the beer. It's like start simple, and then over time,
it is
get more complicated.
Yeah. And take a bite and chew it a little bit and understand it, and then go and take another bite.
And like your love for, like you said, cooking and food, I feel like that's probably another, I don't know, did you feel like that was a boost to your energy of like, okay, we got beer's running good, we're doing that, and then it was like, now we're gonna do this food program, and I'm, did that jazz you up?
It didn't.
Oh, it didn't?
It didn't, no. and I have to be perfectly honest. Yeah. Some of those choices were made under a lot of duress. And, if I had to be fully open and honest, we were looking at tooth and nail last fall, so coming out of summer of 2023, I guess. And people hadn't come out in droves yet. The world wasn't quite back together.
Yeah.
And during some of those down months in the fall where the weather gets pretty shitty, we were looking at it pretty nervously at the business. And it was this realization that just making beer wasn't enough anymore.
Right.
And so going into Christmas, it was a huge Hail Mary of trying things to see if during the Christmas holidays people could understand that we had a lot more food options and that we didn't sacrifice on the quality of the food. I mean, we're presenting you with sandwiches and snacks and some pizzas and things. It's not, we're not trying to elevate the cuisine to anything, but we're also not sacrificing any of the quality of the food we're putting out.
The thing you are serving is quality.
For what it is, and we'll always maintain that, but also adding a lot more non-alcoholic options, because there was some trends going in that way. We're not going to make a non-alcoholic beer at Tooth and Nail, because the logistics behind us doing it and the safety behind us doing it doesn't exist in our facility, but we can buy other people's and sell them to you, right? So offering more and making sure that at our busiest season for 2 weeks during the Christmas holidays, everybody was exposed to that was a hell of a lot of work and very, very stressful. And I'm really happy to say and grateful that it worked, because we had one of the better Januaries we had in a very long time as a result. But none of it was fun, and none of it felt gratifying. And I don't mean to sound negative
no
at all. You know, I had personal things going on top of that, and it was a real slug, and it was very stressful, and I don't ever want to have to go through that again. But it's like anything in life, right? Those real gritty times,
Right.
the other side of that is always so fulfilling.
Like
right?
now you've done it.
Now I
You're
feel
like,
amazing about
okay,
it all,
good,
right?
yeah.
You know, like now, you know, I'm really proud of the food we're serving.
Yeah.
You know, we're going to develop that going into the fall so that we can have beer specials and food specials that are designed to pair together so that people can have an experience that way. So now it's feeling like it's fun.
Sure. Well, that's a good lesson too. Sometimes you just gotta do shit you don't even want to do. Like it's
A lot of the time you have to do shit you don't want to do.
It's not the fun part, right? Like,
No.
you know, you're like, oh God, I have to, okay, well, I thought I was going to do this. Like, I just want to bake apple pies, right? And it's like, okay, well, yeah, but you can't just do that all day.
Well, but you know, it's good. The hard times feel like the longest, and it feels like you're never going to get out of that hard time. And that, I think, is just life in a nutshell. And whether you're talking a business, a creative idea, just your life in general and your personal relationships, those dark times always feel long and like you're never going to get out of them, right? But when you do, the next time something bad happens, you have a better perspective to deal with it. Hopefully, you know, because things can be extreme in a lot of circumstances.
Right.
But I've had some real down times in my life, and it's never dragged on forever. There's always been an outcome of that gives me a new perspective, and then so much positivity comes my way. And I'm lucky that I'm riding that wave right now, and I know that wave is not going to last forever.
Yeah.
But I'm in a much better position in my life to take advantage of that wave and respect it and be grateful for it than I ever was before. And I hope that that's how life continues forever.
Yeah.
You know, just to get better and better at dealing with all that
Well,
stuff.
and I know you take steps for that. So I'll ask you two last questions. One, I know you did a bunch of traveling and learning, and now one would think like, okay, well, you've learned and now you're brewing. But I know just from knowing you personally, you are still traveling, you are still learning, you are still looking for experiences and other people bouncing ideas off of each other. How important is like the community of brewers that you've accumulated now, like getting together and brewing and trying new things, and you're still traveling? Like, I feel like some people would be like, well, you're well into it now, you don't need to learn new things, but I feel like you think you do, and you are striving, wanting to.
Oh, I mean, I haven't even scratched the surface of what I plan to learn. Not even close. I mean, I'm a novice student in my own mind. And I don't exaggerate that. I mean, I know that to be true just from the past experiences. I think getting out traveling and collaborating and generating ideas from other brewers and friends and things is something that I've really genuinely missed for the last 5 years. You know, I have been able to do some travels, and every time I leave the four walls of the brew pub, I come back with something.
Right.
And I'm really excited for this time right now because it feels as though that's just about to start happening en masse again. I've always shied away from collaborations with other breweries for a lot of personal reasons and my own opinions on what those events often become. To me, they've rarely been very fulfilling.
Right.
Aside from a few that I've done that have been insanely fulfilling.
Sure. Yeah.
But I'm also trying to be a little more open-minded, and so we probably will embark down that kind of path in the next year. Especially, I've had a lot of requests to do some stuff with other breweries that I respect, and I think, well, you know, I can't always be this curmudgeon that's always looking for the greatest outcome on everything all the time. I might as well go have some fun with some people, and for sure, I'm going to take one little nugget away from that day or that weekend or that week. And bring it back and make ourselves better. And through the process, you know, also be social and you know, fill that cup and see people again. I've lost touch with a lot of people. Working at the brew pub, you know, I mean, we're on a corner in the neighborhood of Hintonburg in Ottawa, Canada. I mean, and working in the back in these four little walls. Those walls become pretty small after a while, and you kind of start to, you know, drink your own Kool-Aid under that umbrella. And I definitely would have to go try some other flavors of Kool-Aid right now.
That's fair. You know? That's good. And I think that's, but like for me, I know that's important. Like you have to, I don't know, keep up with the equipment, keep up with other people that are trying different techniques. How are you rotating? How are you doing? Like all kinds of stuff, you know?
Yeah.
What are the things you're trying? And I think that's really important. So
if somebody is requesting to collaborate on a recipe with me or an idea with me, I do really want them to come to me with something. So I have had people in the past that have been like, "Hey, do you want to do a collaboration?"
Right.
I'll be like, "Sure." Like, what are you thinking? And they'll be like, "Well, I don't know. What do you want to do?" And then to me, it's dead and buried at that point.
Yeah. You got to come with something.
Like,
you got to bring some.
Like, you got to bring something to me. I'm not the one going to you.
Right.
And if I have something where I'm like, "Oh man, I really need to understand this particular process, and I've tried it, I just can't understand, but I know that these guys have been successful."
Yeah.
You know, then I would go to them and say, "Hey, listen, I'm looking to discover this. Maybe you kind of want to discover it a little further. Do you want to do that together?"
Right.
That's how I would approach it.
Yeah.
But I haven't approached a lot of people to collab with. So.
Do you get actually? Okay, so I lied because I have a follow-up question here to that question. I get requests all the time because whatever I would consider myself a creative person. I think a lot of people do. So they will come and they'll say, "Hey, you know what I think would be a really great idea is," and they'll tell me their idea, and I'm like, "Okay, great, let's do it." Or they'll wait for me to do it. Same thing of like the brewery. Do you get a lot of people, or like, could you make a fortune if every time you got a nickel for everybody that said like, "Hey, you know, really great in a beer"? Do you get a lot of people that approach you or say like this?
Not
cool
that
idea?
many. Not that many. I mean,
but there's still a few.
It has happened.
Yeah.
Those
and they have no intention of doing anything, or they don't know how to do it, but they just.
I think it's more that
they put upon you,
it's
like, "Hey, you know, what'd be really cool in a beer is if you did." Blah, blah.
I think a lot of that I probably, you know, it's very important to separate your ego from what's reality at that time, because the easiest thing for me to say is, "Well, you don't even know what you're talking about, and clearly you haven't followed my brewery for the last decade because we don't do that kind of thing."
Right.
But that's a very egotistical answer,
Sure,
and
Shut it down.
my job is not to be that person, right? And so you know, a simple answer would be, "No, we've never thought of that."
Yeah.
How's the beer? You know, how's your beer? Great. Let's talk about something else.
Right.
A more complicated answer was, "We've never approached that thought because of this," and then that you got to be careful there, because that can take you down a rabbit hole you don't necessarily want to go down.
Right. Fair.
But no, most people don't generally do that. The hardest question or ask that I get is, "Why don't you brew this beer anymore?" Or "When is this beer coming back?"
Right.
And the way that I internalized that, and that became very frustrating for a long time, because I'm like, there's only so many tanks. Like, look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I have 9 beers on tap. I have 5 tanks. Like, what do you want me to do?
Right.
But the way that I've since, like, once again, take the ego away, and you become really amazed that so many people have their own favorites, and that you've produced all these different brands over the years, that this many people love that beer, and this many people love that beer, and this many people love that beer. Is that enough people to sustain, you know, selling a tank in 4 weeks or 5 weeks?
Right.
Maybe not, and maybe that's why they don't make sense to brew anymore.
Right.
But at least I knew that I was successful in making that to the point where I made that group of people happy, which is pretty awesome.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah,
that's cool.
It's very cool.
That's
actually.
cool. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, that's awesome. All right, I have one last question for you. If you could have any one thing given to you now, other than like, you know, $10 million, what would help move your creative self forward?
$10 million.
$11 million. Other than money, what would be something that you would really value to help move your creativity, career, yourself?
That's a really awesome question. I think that a potential answer could be to start a new brand. Because when you spend time building a brand and being very conscious of that, I say no a lot. And it's both my most powerful tool and it's my worst, flaw. But I say no a lot because there's a lot that has to fall under the umbrella or the vision that I have for Tooth and Nail. And so it's like Tooth and Nail isn't just all of a sudden going to start producing slushy sours, right?
Right.
That would be like, there was I don't remember what book it was, and I know it's in a collection I have on brand and all this stuff, but they talked about Adidas taking away the 3 stripes, right?
Right.
Like that's career suicide,
crazy,
right? You
yeah.
never do that kind of thing.
Crazy,
So we would never do that. But to open to start a second brand where I could produce different styles, then would fall logically under the Tooth and Nail umbrella. That would be super fun.
That's cool.
I love Belgian beer. The Abbé de 7 Minutes collab we did with Godspeed was kind of that idea. And so that was such a rewarding collaboration because we released 4 Belgian beers, all very different from one another, under a different brand name, all at one time as a package.
Right.
And the work and the rewards that went with that were awesome. So to be able to do something like that, there's always this idea I had well before Tooth and Nail opened, when I was still dreaming up becoming a brewer and what I wanted to do with all that stuff. And it would be this really, really cool, like very small eatery, like a 30-seat diner.
Right.
Where I had like a brewing system the size of our pilot system. And there would be like, not a new menu every day. I mean, Jesus, this isn't the Bear, but maybe a menu every 2 or 3 months, maybe a menu per quarter.
Right.
And it'd be 6 dishes, for example. And each dish would be paired with a beer brewed on that system, but those beers were never brewed to emulate any existing beer style. They were brewed to go as a perfect companion with that dish. And I got to do that once for Gold Medal Plates, which is now the Great Canadian Kitchen Party. I collaborated with a chef friend of mine, Jesse Valens, in Toronto, and we produced the beer Agraria to be paired with this dish. And it was just outrageous how great it was. And that to me is like the creative fulfillment. That is like the holy grail of creative fulfillment, is to be able to do something like that. So anything within those kinds of ideas, but I haven't put a lot of thought into it.
That's fair. But it's still boiling.
It never stops.
The passion for this is still boiling.
And sometimes it goes away. And this is actually back to songwriting, right? Like, I think a lot of great songwriters go through whole periods of time where either they have writer's block or they don't even really think about that for a while.
Right. Go do something totally different.
Yeah, I get periods where I don't think about a new beer for months at a time. And then it's just like it strikes you. Yeah. And then you can't stop thinking about anything else. Like it takes over your week, and you put all this stuff aside because you're just like going for it. And that's what makes this career still so much fun.
When that happens to you, are you probably to the detriment of other things, but are you able to like fully just pay attention to that?
Sometimes.
Like, will you let or like give into that, I guess?
I mean, I could if I had a space to go.
Yeah.
My job is not only, running the brewery, but also just kind of not chief decision maker, but like I'm kind of in charge of the vision for the business as well. And so there are a lot of people who have questions for me or need guidance throughout their daily jobs. And so the interruptions can always interrupt that thing.
Right.
But if I had the ability, if I was like, okay, so I've got this idea, I need to bang this out in a weekend, and I could go up to a log cabin in the woods, could I do it all day long, every day, and into the night, and sleep thinking about it? 100%.
Okay,
100%.
Cool. Yeah. That's how I think that's the thing. I don't know. People always ask me all the time. It's like, oh, I don't know what my thing is. I was like, well, you haven't found it yet, because you'll know.
100%.
You'll know.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
You'll know.
And it's
the
feeling that happens, and it's one of these things in life that is so special, because it is this split second of, oh my God.
Yeah, here it is. The light is here.
There it is. And it happens. And, it's happened to me once in a major, major way. It's happened to me several times in my life, and generally leads to some of the more special things in your life, right? But when you know.
And I hope people stay open to, because I think our whole world is really, I think it struggles to keep people open to that, because like, oh, that's a really cool glimmer of hope. I could own a brewery, but how many people do that? I couldn't do that.
Well, that was my first thought.
Holy fuck!
And then I actually had that thought while drinking this gigantic glass of Hoegaarden, right?
Right.
And I was like, well, somebody makes it.
Somebody makes it.
Somebody makes it.
I can do this.
Yeah.
If that person can do it, I can do it.
Yeah, for sure.
Fuck yeah.
And
then you did.
Sounds crazy, but you only get one life. So, like, get at it.
All right. Well, that's get at it. Shut this fucking podcast off and go do a thing.
Yeah.
Wow, what an incredible episode, right? Am I right? I'm so honored to be able to have any one of these conversations, and each one just keeps getting better and better and better. What a bunch of ground covered, really. I hope you took all your lessons. I know I love that we talked about the mentors and that ability to ask for mentors and not really even knowing like much, but just knowing what you want, when you want it, and going to no lengths to stop you. Like nothing will stop you, like stopping at no lengths to get the thing you want. You know what I mean? I love that Matt's stubbornness, Matt's creativity, Matt's just sheer joy and energy for this stuff propelled him forward, and I love that. It's much like, and I think we talked about this a little bit in this conversation, is that when something just keeps you up at night, right? We have these moments in our life, and I think we get cut off from them, but I hope that you keep your mind open. I hope that you're ready for them. I hope that that you can remain steadfast in the things you want in life, right? And constantly be on the pivot. If you're not in a place where you don't want to be, keep your head on that pivot so that the next time something comes around, bam, it's yours, full steam ahead. Nothing will stop you. That's what this whole thing is all about, right? It's like what is the thing that can propel you forward? And I love that we talked about playing, right? We talked about playing in the last episode. We talked about playing in this episode because again, it's so important, right? Matt could just make a few little beers that he wants to make and serve the community super well, but why not push it for his own self and for the community, right? There's that balance between what people want and what you want as a creative, right? Never forget that you also are a part of that. Right? People say this all the time about like, oh, if I do the thing I love for a living, I'm going to not learn to love it and blah, blah, blah. Bullshit. I've called bullshit on that so many times because it's like, okay, yes, maybe not exactly the way you want to do it the whole time for 50 years. Who the fuck wants to do that? Anything for 50 years, right? But little pivots here and there. And it's like, he's going to play with ingredients and styles and methods and techniques and different staff and the arrangement of the facility himself, and all of those little adjustments means that energy comes back in. I hope you listened to that. I hope you heard all that. And that my mistakes are okay. Mistakes are going to happen, and they're not even really mistakes. They're not failures. They're just learning points, right? And that there's how many conversations have we had now where there are no failures. It is literally just continued learning, right? And I think especially as adults, we get down on ourselves immediately. And we're like, oh, I'm not good at this. Of course you're not good at this. You haven't done anything yet. You barely started, right? And I hope that's the case if you're listening to this. If you have started, then hooray, and you're making it. That's awesome. Welcome in. And I hope that you become the mentor to other folks that need it. Anyway, I'm going to leave you guys here. And I hope, I want to leave you with this one question, actually, at the end of this. I want to ask you, what is one thing that just cannot get off your mind? One thing that you would be willing to be stubborn about? One thing that you would never let anybody take away from you? I want you to seriously think about that. I want you to seriously sit down, because I'm guaranteeing you right now, if you're listening to this, there's probably something that you're not doing right now that you could be the locomotive, right? I want you to be the choo-choo train to wherever the hell you're going, and I wish you luck. And until I see you guys next time, we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to comment down below. Of course, you can always go to domorecoolshit.com. Drop me a note there. Let me know what's going on. Love to have the conversations. All right, see you guys later. Bye.